Hello, everyone. Welcome back to What a Comedian. This is Natalie again. I want to thank you again for listening to this episode. This one is a fun one. It's a very long one. If you couldn't tell by the length of this episode, we did talk for a little too long. But that's okay because it was a very unique conversation that I had with this person. We definitely talked about it very in a uncomedic way, I would say. We really dissected honestly, like how comedy is progressing through the ages, how comedy is different between two big comedy scenes. But I definitely enjoy it a lot just by listening to it while editing it. For me personally, I have been very stressed recently. School has been a little hard. Our English teacher's making me write like 7 pages in a week, so that's fun. But college apps are currently in the big run, and I honestly have been slowing down this podcast, and I really need to get it back up, but things has been so busy so far, and I'm hoping to get back on the grind right after. I've been contacting more comedians to see if I could score some interviews, but so far unsuccessful. I think I need to rethink or reconsider my desired goals and people that I want to interview. So that's gonna be for myself, but let's just move on to this episode. So today I'm talking to Steve Hahn. He is currently an actor residing in LA. And although you hear actor, he does have a comedian background, and he does do very comedic things. Sometimes he does some live shows, but mostly does camera work. We do talk about comedy in a very intellectual way, in a very STEM mind, if you couldn't tell. And I really hope you enjoy this conversation because it's a very different conversation than I've had before. It's a very unfunny conversation, but yet entertaining. While I was editing this, my friend was actually like, "Oh, this podcast is actually really good because it helps me study and helps me concentrate on other things too on the side of it." So I really hope you enjoy this and take a listen. So this is a question I always ask everyone. So how and when did you become a comedian?
So I it's an easy question I should be able to answer. So I started comedy after college. I went to the University of Chicago. I went to the University of Chicago for biology and well for math. I graduated with a biology degree. And my last quarter there, I took this music improv class that Second City was teaching, and so I took it like as a fun senior spring class in 2017. And at the end of it, my teachers said that I should continue doing uh, comedy and that they would like help me however I could. So they helped me sign up for my first improv class at Second City outside of right after college. So I signed up for classes at Second City, and then I was doing this accelerated program there, and then halfway through the program, one of my teachers introduced me to the artistic director at Second City, who said that I should audition for this diversity fellowship called Bob Curry, and so I did audition for it and I got it, and so then from there I ended up um, getting hired by Second City as an actor, and then shortly after I got hired by Second City as a faculty member, and then yeah, that's pretty much kind of like how I started. So I started like after college. I didn't know I wanted to do it in college, but it was in 2017, 2018, I guess is when I started.
Did you have any like previous thoughts or like experiences with like the comedy scene before that?
Uh, in some ways, yes. I mean, I've engaged with comedy my whole life. I've liked comedy. I didn't always knew I wanted to do it. My mom used to tell me I should do it. My mom used to make me like sign me up for like I mean specifically musical theater, but like made me sign up for acting and performance opportunities so that I would have the chance to perform and um, like get involved that way. So I've been involved with comedy as a like the concept of it for sure my whole life, but um, in Chicago specifically, I mean Chicago is like such a mecca for comedy. I'm in LA now, so I'm not like there anymore. But I think I went to college there knowing that comedy was in the pulse of the city, if you will. But I didn't really engage with it other than like as a very loose tourist. And then it took me graduating and getting involved with it as trying to do it as a student and then professionally for me to like really get a sense of what it was. So I knew it, but I just think that like I mean, to be honest, I think like comedy, especially in Chicago, especially back then, was like a predominantly what I would say like a white space. So I just didn't engage with it in a way that like felt like it was for me. And that's not like it's not that it felt alienating. It just didn't seem like it was something that I could engage in. So I never pursued it actively, I guess.
I see. I see. So what were you originally attending with your biology major? Were you going like pre med or something?
Yeah, I was gonna be pre med. I took the MCAT and everything. I was gonna go be a doctor out of college, and Chicago is like a great school for academia and a great school for like making really great like professional careers, but not necessarily known as a school that creates actors and comedians. So that was a bit of a hard pivot, but yeah, it was originally to go be a doctor.
So why did you decide to like entirely shift your direction after even after taking like the MCAT and doing all that work?
It's I think my whole life I had been told I needed to go for these external metrics of success because it's just what I was good at. And I've been like a good STEM student my whole life, and like I went to Chicago on a math scholarship. I like got into Chicago. Like it's like my whole life I had been told, like I basically had been pointed in this direction that like because you're good at science, like this is just the natural progression. And so I really internalized that. And which is fine. I like biology. It's not that I like hated doing it every
Yeah.
second. It's like I liked doing it. I hadn't been exposed to comedy and acting in a heightened way, other than like when my mom used to make me do it as a kid. And I've always been like the funny one in my class, and like I've been a class not I mean a class clown makes it sound sillier than what it is, but I've always like, cracked jokes and been a funny person. But I never thought that I could like make money from doing it or do it professionally. And so I just did biology for that reason, and then it took taking classes second season and seeing like people making a living from it and like doing it in a heightened sense that allowed me to take that next step.
Yeah, I really relate to that honestly because I'm also going on a pre med track currently, but I just got exposed to comedy like a year or two ago, like serious like stand up and all that things. So it's like it's making me decide because I kind of want to go that direction, but I also need to apply to college with a major, and I don't think they have comedy as one. So like it's just like it's kind of hard.
It's an interesting world because I mean it's interesting. So like at U Chicago I like worked in admissions, and I think that there's definitely a sense of like I think when you look at like schools like U Chicago or any top school really, or even like I mean Michigan's in your backyard. Like you look at these schools, like I don't I mean Michigan actually maybe less because Michigan has a phenomenal music theater program, and there's like a lot of really great BFAs come out of Michigan. But I think a lot of times like going to a school like Chicago for me, like it's so serious academic from an academia perspective. So I didn't even I mean comedy obviously is not a major at U Chicago, but
Yeah.
the idea of doing it in any way other than extracurricular. Truly, not that it was like I didn't think that I just it's not that like I was discouraged from doing it. I just it's not even in the framework,
Yeah.
for people thinking it could be a thing. So which is fine, but like it's just like it's a world I felt like I was getting into kind of late, honestly, which I wasn't. I was like still young. I graduated college when I was like 21. I was like
Yeah.
still, I'm still in my 20s. Like I'm not like so old, and I have like of quite a few years under my belt at this point now. But at the time, it felt like I was getting to the game kind of late.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like comedy is something I feel like a lot of people don't get into early, I would say. Because it's just kind of hard to discover it at an early age, I feel.
I think that that's true to a certain extent. I think it's true for people of color, particularly for sure. I think that from what I gathered, at least while I was there, I think a lot of like the like people I was working with that were white had been exposed to it and had opportunities to do it since they were kids. I mean, Second City has summer camps that are pretty widely attended, like for kids in particular. I don't know if the racial. I don't. I'm saying this because I genuinely don't know. I don't know if the racial breakdown of that is like super diverse of these programs, but they have summer programs, and a lot of the people that I had done comedy with that were on my improv teams and on like sketch teams and things like that with me were people who had done Second City camps at some point in their lives. So I think a
Mm.
lot of them had gotten exposure to it from a young age. It's just, I think for me, it's like not that. Again, my mom has been so encouraging for me pursuing entertainment and things like that, but it's not that I'm necessarily. I just think that there are. It's just like a population dynamic thing where like even if you look at where Second City is in Chicago, it's in Old Town, which is
Yeah.
a predominantly white neighborhood. It's like it's right north of downtown. It's not necessarily the most diverse area. It would be a very different story if Second City opened its theater like in Chinatown or in like even in Hyde Park. Like the theater that exists in Hyde Park, which is where Chicago is a very different type of theater and has very different resources than Second City does. In Old Town. So, and I think that's just like Second City's been an institution and has been in that space since 1960 something, so it's like it's just kind of like always been that way, which doesn't make it okay, but it's just like it does change the way in which like access and um like racial access looks like in these spaces.
Yeah, I definitely when I only went there once, but when I went there, I was like, it's definitely much more whitely predominated. But I think they're trying to incorporate more diversity, like just seeing like the cast on like in ensembles a little bit.
I mean, I can't really speak. I don't. I work for Second City still as a teacher, but I'm not like in their DEI office or anything like that, so I don't
Yeah.
really like know. Like, I can't really speak to like what diversity and equity and inclusion looks like for them. But yeah, I mean, I think that they're trying. I think that there's always like I'm like a person of color that is pretty vocal about it. I mean, obviously, I'm sure you can tell just from this conversation. Like,
Yeah.
I'm pretty vocal about what like being a person of color, what it means and what it looks like. So I always think that everyone can be doing more, but I do think, yeah, I mean, like the casts are way more diverse now than they were back in the day, for sure. If you look at like old posters of Second City, like for sure they're way more diverse. Like I wish that it's a topic that is interesting because I think that a big thing that happened at Second City in 2020 was that they had the kind of like big alignment on like what their diversity looks like most companies do. Like in
Yeah.
2020 they have like a really big alignment on what that looks like, and I think that they need to um, the conversation behind like what the difference between like a marginalized comedian versus an underrepresented comedian is very different, right? And I think like so most companies that's the exact same thing. Like to be marginalized and to be underrepresented is the exact same thing, which is not necessarily true, right?
Yeah.
Like what the needs are to like get more Asian people to take improv classes and sign up for improv classes is a very different conversation than what it would look like to get like other people of color, in the room, or to get like queer people in the room, or to
Hmm.
get et cetera, et cetera. Like those are all like completely different conversations, and like what the support looks like is different. But if you have like a blanket program that's like for anyone that's not a straight white man, like that doesn't work because like what like a woman needs to feel supported in that building is very different than like, or not very different, but like can be different,
Yeah.
and will have intersections as well, but will look different than what like an Asian man needs in that building versus like what a trans comedian needs in that building, right? But they kind of just like, at least when I was there, like the program that existed for the diversity program that I applied for and did was like kind of just blanket like for anyone that's not a straight white man.
So they kind of like made everyone the same in a way.
Mean, the opportunities were kind of the same, and so it's like and that's like an equality theory of thought rather than an equity theory of thought,
Yeah.
which is again not saying like one is better than the. I mean, I do think equity is better and like makes more sense if you just think of it logistically, but like I think for the longest time, like most companies have operated on the equality point of view, which is
Yeah.
not nuanced way to approach anything.
I mean, I guess that they can definitely always do better, but it's definitely a big improvement since like before, I would say.
It is a big improvement, I think, and again, I just think it's like a difference of school of thought of like whether or not people are satisfied with that
Yeah.
shift or if they're dissatisfied. I mean, it's just it's. I think you can be both. I think you can be grateful that the needle's moving forward. I think you can be um I guess like disgruntled with the way that it is. But it's like I think for me, like that's why when I left Chicago quite early actually in my comedy career. I didn't like stay there for that long, and I left there quite early just because I like actively, conscientiously thought to myself like I don't know if this is a place I need to like be putting more time and effort into, with the return being worth it for me.
Hmm. Is there what's like the difference between like the Chicago and LA like comedy scene? Is there more diversity in LA, you would say?
I would say though, yeah, for sure. I mean, LA is a much more diversity than Chicago. Chicago's quite segregated. Chicago is like a really diverse city if you just look at the like racial breakdown of it, but it is a really racially segregated city. The geography of the city makes it actually partially that way. LA is diverse, and I don't know if it's more like or if it's less segregated than Chicago is, but I do feel that the spaces that I am in tend to be like more diverse racially and in other ways too. But there's just less comedy here. Chicago, like comedy, kind of is like part of the, like I said, like it's like part of the pulse of the city. Like Chicago, like when people think of Chicago, they think like beyond the landmarks. They think like part of it is comedy. They think like Second
Yeah.
City. They think IO like that, or like I mean, especially Second City more than anything. Like they think of comedy, whereas in LA, like people think entertainment, but not necessarily comedy all the time, and that's reflective in the art scene here. So I perform way less here than I do when I was in Chicago, which is fine with me. It's not something that I like need to do all the time, especially ever since I pivoted to doing like on camera stuff more in LA. But um, comedy is for sure like alive and well here. It's just not like uh, everywhere here per se.
Yeah, that makes sense. Would you say like you prefer like live comedy or like on camera things more?
I definitely prefer on camera. I think that you have a lot more control. I mean, I guess that's not true. You have less control in some ways, but I like on camera more just as like what makes like it's just the part of my brain that artistically feels really fulfilled. I like live theater. I like live theater. I like performing live a lot. I think there's a lot of magic to it. I think like the fact that like what you create is like basically a pact between you and the audience for that night and that night only is a really cool concept, and I think that's really great. But I think the way in which like on camera stuff lives forever and can be really edited like with a lot of precision is um, really great to me, and the pay is a lot obviously a lot better. So for those reasons, I do gravitate naturally towards on camera more.
Do you work full time as a comedian?
As an actor, not as a comedian, but as an
Actor?
actor, yes.
Actor?
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right, okay.
yeah.
I saw online that you actually directed a few things. Do you prefer acting more or directing more?
Acting for sure. I directed one. I directed a bunch of sketch shows, which I love doing. Like I've directed like live sketches, like in the through the training center that I love. I've directed one thing that was filmed that I also acted in, and I don't love the direct. I'm not. I like directing in the theoretical sense. I like having creative control over things. I like making decisions, but directing is a lot of logistics that you have to know. Like directing is a lot of knowing that you have like knowing camera angles and knowing like what you want the thing to look like, and it's like so much create. It's like you're in charge of the whole project. You know what I mean? So like of course like you have to not only think about the acting, but you have to think about like how is the sound? How are we going to hook up the sound? How are we going to like rig this in a way where we can make the lighting look, etc. Like it's like there's so many moving elements to directing, and I think some people like really thrive on that, obviously, and I'm just not someone that like I like the creative side of directing, but the logistics side of directing is a little bit daunting to me.
Yeah, would you say that you're able to have this creative side even as an actor of directing? Like would you able to be creative sometimes as an actor?
For sure. I mean, I think like acting is, um, I mean, I think that like the true creativity that you can find with it is that if you allow yourself to be an actor who is also writing their stuff, which is like a rarity, obviously, especially because I mostly do TV, so like I don't really have like creative control fully. But I think because I come from a STEM world, I don't feel stifled in that way like that. I think some people maybe feel like if they're like creatives that have been creative their whole life. But I come from like a STEM world, so like anything that's like non math like
Yeah.
already feels like a big creative stretch for me in a really fun way. So I don't feel the like overwhelming need to have that much creative control over the things I do.
Do you definitely think you're like, since you come from like such a STEM background, do you think it affects the way you like do like your humor or like the way you do your like skills and stuff?
I definitely think of comedy and like joke structure and everything in ones and zeros. And like when I teach a second stage, I teach writing, and when I teach writing a second stage, I definitely like analyze and view that world in ones and zeros as well. So I mean, yeah, I think like everything is a science. I think like laughter and comedy are also like they're all formulas, you know,
Yeah.
like laughter. It's just um like things that like comedy and laughter are just subversions of expectations, and it's all about how can you flip the expectation as quickly as possible, and all of it is like heightening, and all of that is like simple like one two three, you know, like it's so formulaic in a way, and every joke can be broken down to set up and pay off. Like all of it is, you know, if you view it in that way, can be kind of like plug and chug. And so I view comedy in that way. I think a lot of people like feel stifled by that or don't like that structure, and that's so fine. That's so their prerogative. I like that structure, and my brain really likes that. So I view it that way. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean, like, I feel like I don't have that much experience in comedy, but I feel like once I do, my brain will probably go that way since it's just easier to think of it as equations. Yeah, as like my whole life I've always been doing equations and things, so it's like comes naturally to me too. Yeah. Um, how does it feel to just like as a queer Asian man, how does it feel to just act in such a white straight society, I would say? Like, do you get heckles or like do you face any discrimination against this?
you know, not like so explicitly. I don't like. I mean, I hope it stays this way, but I've never like gotten heckled on stage in that way. Like not in a serious way. My friends have heckled me like in a fun way, but I'm not.
Yeah.
I have. I mean, I think that like I feel very privileged in like when I'm doing comedy, right? I think like I'm sure comedians like Margaret Cho and like people who came before me like have to go through like hell to get to the space I am. I also think that part of it, like you mentioned, like I am queer and Asian. I'm also a man, so I think like part of it too is I'm like a 6 foot tall man, and
Yeah.
I wear shoes that make me 6'1", like 6'2". Sometimes like I'm quite tall, I'm quite domineering. So I think like I'm having a very different experience with all of this than like maybe like a smaller Asian queer Asian man might even, you know. So I don't. I'm just saying like I have to be cognizant of like the privilege I do have. That being said, I do think that it is a pretty predominantly like white dominated space. I will say my career took off after like before 2020. I think I had only booked one TV show, and it was Chicago Med, like
Yeah.
which is like a procedural show, and my scene got cut, and so I moved
Oh.
to LA with no credits really. Like
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I'm still Chicago. Like, I still get residuals from Chicago Med, but I'm not in the episode
Yeah.
at least. You know, I'm just in the ending credits, and so I like came here with like one non-union commercial and no credits, and then my first year here, I booked like five TV shows and like a movie, right? So like I was like working a lot that first year, and I think part of it was COVID for sure. And I think a big part of it too is that like the industry just completely changed its way that it talks about race and views race because of like this not complete. I think there's still a lot of work to be done. I think that like I'm not saying it's perfect in any way, but I think that there's a lot of room for improvement in sorry, there was a lot of improvement in 2020 that allowed it so that I could like exist and was perceived and seen in like a much better and different light than I had been previous to 2020. So I think that's like a big thing for sure for me.
Yeah, so you
That
definitely
like
came in at like the right time, you would say.
yeah, like I think my career had this like big trajectory shift like at the right time. So it felt like like nothing felt so daunting or like scary or unobtainable um in the way that I think it might have used to feel for people who looked and sounded like me. But like I don't know, like the first show that my first recurring gig, for example, was a quite diverse show. You know, it was the show called The Big Leap. It's on Fox. It's a really great show. But that was the first time I was ever recurring, and like in my little pod that I like was acting with, like I wasn't the only person of color. I wasn't the only queer person. You know, so that felt really really great. And so I think that's like an example of like how like yeah, just this the comfort and ease in which I was able to, you know, like maybe not necessarily, not again, it wasn't perfect, but it was still like a, I think a big improvement from what it would have been 2 years prior even.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I know you have moved around a lot in your life, from like let's just say New York to Florida to Korea. How do you say that has affected you as you like constantly were moving around?
I mean, I think it's made me adaptable. I think that if you don't look and sound like the people in your area, it makes you have to, you either sink or swim, you know, like I think you either become like super introverted and you don't go forward from it, or you find a way to adapt. So I think it made me super adaptable, which I'm thankful for. I mean, I think like Florida, I don't look and sound really like anyone in Florida.
Yeah.
And then in Korea, I mean, I am Korean. I speak like it's my first language, so of course I speak it fluently. But I have a lot of habits that are quite American as well, and I have a lot of mannerisms that are really American.
Yeah.
And so I think like that's always an interesting disparity too, is that culturally like I toggle both. I do think that there are a lot of people in comedy that are there is a lot of Asian people in comedy who are like half Asian, half white, and so I think like they have a very different relationship with race and with like that world way more than I do. Like I don't have I only present as Asian. There's nothing else I could present as, and I don't like I've never felt too this and too little of this in the way that I think a lot of mixed race people do. So a lot of the people, a lot of my Asian friends in the industry are like mixed race. So their relationship with like their Asianness is quite different than my relationship with my Asianness. And that like I've again like I've always been Asian, like presented as Asian rather. Not they've always also always been Asian, but I've
Yeah.
always presented as Asian. There's something that like people can confuse me as. I've lived in the country that my nationality is from, which like a lot of my friends who are Asian have like lived in America their whole lives, which is also normal and fine. But I lived in Korea. I like speak Korean fluently. Like I think there's like this. My relationship with my Asianness is just a little bit different. And so it is interesting because I think that like a lot of the people in the industry don't necessarily have the exact same uh like moving around experience, I guess. And so I'm really grateful for it for sure, but it does make it feel I think there's a lot of like gaps of knowledge I have too that like over the last few years I've had to learn about the industry and comedy. Like the comedy I grew up watching is just very different than the comedy that a lot of the people that I work with grew up watching. You know, like I
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
grow up watching a lot of movies that they watched. I didn't grow up watching like you know these like comedy titans that I
Yeah.
think like now I come to watch it as an adult, but like I didn't I think the main American that I grew up watching that influenced a lot of my comedies like is Tina Fey, which a lot of people have of course, but I didn't grow up watching like Adam Sandler or Will Ferrell in the same way that a lot of people have. Actually, Will Ferrell I watched in Korea because he's pretty big in Korea too. Like Adam Sandler and I'm trying to think of other examples of like comedy titans. But like that like those are all people that I had to engage with more as an adult rather than as a kid. So I think that's like a big that might be how like moving has influenced my comedy in a way that like has made me to catch up. But otherwise, I've always viewed moving around as much as I did as like nothing but an asset.
Did you have a southern accent from Florida? Because I'm as a person, I lived in Alabama for a few years, and my friends in Michigan say I used to have a southern accent before like I got a Michigan accent. I was just wondering if you had garnered an accent too living in the South.
But thankfully, no, I didn't get a southern accent. I grew up in Gainesville, which is like a college town. It's like a little like blue bubble in a sea of red in northern Florida. So it's a little the city itself is like not necessarily the most like it doesn't feel like the South per se. It feels more like the it feels kind of like a college. I mean, it feels a lot like southern. It feels like if you took Ann Arbor and put it in Florida.
Yeah.
Like there's so of course there's like southern elements to it, like there it's more than Ann Arbor is going to, but it's a college town, you know, like we have UF, it's like, you know, it's like similar to Michigan in a lot of ways. So yeah, I thankfully did not, but I also had learned English in Korea, like at a school. So like,
Hmm.
you know, I did used to have a small Korean accent for sure, but
Yeah.
not a southern accent.
Did you have to like um when you moved to Florida, well, when you moved to other places and you say you were from Florida, did people have any like negative reactions towards that?
Jokingly, I don't think it's ever like really like, oh God, he's, you know, he's from Florida, like that's, you know, I think like it's a very common joke whenever people find out I'm from Florida to be like, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss, you know, like they, you know, like I think that's like a very common joke that I hear being from Florida. But you know, Florida is like, I think Florida obviously is like a very problem state. I think like it's riddled with problems.
Yeah.
But um, and I'm not like, I'm not ashamed to be from Florida, but I'm not like proud to be from Florida. I'm just
Yeah.
like it's where I grew up. It's my, it's like I spent a lot of formative years there, so of course like I view it as home in some sense, but I'm not like so ashamed or unashamed to be from Florida. It's just kind of like this random place that I'm from. I have more pride about having lived in Korea and New York than Florida, even though I've spent the most amount of time in Florida. It's just, but it's just kind of like this random, really big stepping stone in my life that I stopped at for a while before continuing on.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that because a lot of people I I hopefully it's not serious, but a lot of people, including my friends, don't like that I'm from Alabama, and like they're like, don't ever mention that because it's embarrassing. So like I used to be like very ashamed of being from such a problematic city. I mean, especially because I was from Birmingham, Alabama, so a lot of things has happened there. Um, but I didn't have like such a negative experience as like people would say when I was actually there. Like it was fine. I didn't.
Yeah, I think there is, I think that there's this idea. I mean I think one, America's too big. I think like the
Yeah,
it's too big of a country. I think that a lot of people, I think it makes it so that you don't really know anything about anywhere, you know. So I think like I do think that people have this idea. There's a really great article that came out in 2016, I want to say, but it's just like it was an article that was about like, don't think just because I'm from the South, don't think that I'm stupid. And I think that there is like this division between like the North and the South in America for sure. And I think the way the people from the North treat the South isn't necessarily rooted in inaccuracy per se, but it does create this like really problematic way in which people view the South and like think that the South is uneducated and think that the South is um like this like hillbilly place that barely has electricity and like lives backwards and things like that. And like, yeah, the South has a lot of racist tendencies. The South is not perfect in any stretch of the
yeah,
imagination, but to call it this like uneducated bumpkin, you know, like racist place kind of puts it in a situation where like it's one, unfair, but two, like doesn't give it a chance to grow, or places a lot of barriers on it to like grow and change, right? And so
yeah,
it further creates this yeah, this problematic narrative. And a lot of times too, the South is the way that it is because it's underfunded too. Like a lot of like the South is just like an underfunded place. So I think when people say like, don't say that you're from Alabama, or don't say you're from like, or like have like, I mean no one's ever said that about Florida to me specifically, but Florida is also like a huge state. That's also like a tourist place, you know.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I think people make jokes about Florida, but I think that if I were to say I was from Alabama or Mississippi or something like that, I think the ways in which people talk about it is, you know, I mean, it's a loaded word, but I think it's problematic. Like I think it's again like to create this narrative that these southern states are dumb is, yeah, it's just it's unfair, I think.
yeah. I think it's dumb that they think the states, those the southern states, are like stupid or something because like I learned most of my academic like knowledge, or well, I wouldn't say all my academic knowledge, but like the basics of my things were all in the South. And so like I wouldn't be where I am now if I didn't learn this from Alabama. So it just like they're better. My friends are better. Bleh, definitely better now, but in the past they were quite stereotyping it.
For sure. Yeah, it's just it's silly because yeah, I mean the South also has like really great institutions as well. I think like some of the, I think like obviously like the best schools in the country are like in the Northeast, but like there's really great schools in the South as well that I think people like a lot of times people don't want to even apply to. But I'm like, I think Vanderbilt obviously is a really phenomenal
Yeah.
school. Like Duke is in the South technically, UF is in the South, UGA, Georgia Tech. Like these are just, I mean, these are institutions of higher learning. Even this isn't even high school, but like, those are all really phenomenal schools. And I think the way in which people talk about education, it's like, yeah, it's silly that it's like people wouldn't go somewhere because it's in the South.
Yeah. Do you think your I know you said that your city was kind of like the blue dot in like a red state, but do you think that being in such a predominantly, I would say, Republican state has like affected your view on politics?
Yes and no. Yeah, of course. I mean, my politics growing up definitely were influenced by Florida, of course. Also, like when I'm 28, so like
Yeah.
I graduated high school in 2013, and when I graduated high school, like the conversation about race and the conversation about like what it meant to be Republican and Democratic was just so different than it is now. Like we had social media, but it wasn't like we're like my generation's not nearly as uh like knowledgeable in that way as I think like your generation is through like TikTok. Like I think
Yeah.
TikTok is a really educational platform, and so I just didn't have the same like verbiage growing up back then. But I don't know if it was because I was from Florida or just because like it was like a generational thing. Like the needle has moved quite a bit. Like I grew up on like if you look at the shows that are on TV now, for example, like you can see how different it is just like from a conversation perspective. Like the fact that like Euphoria exists in the way that it does,
Yeah.
or like the fact that there are shows that are so like showcase such great stories like Beef or I'm trying to think of other shows that have come out in the last year. Like, I mean, I'm thinking from an Asian perspective, like Squid Game, Beef. Like, these are all shows that are phenomenal and like all Asian casts. Like, it's so cool to see. But I grew up on shows like Glee and 30 Rock, where it's like those shows like have diversity, yes, and the way they talk about race is just so different than the way that we talk about race now. And so like, and that's just one example. Like, it's just race. It's just what it's like first and foremost in my mind. But um, so that's all to say. Like, do I think that there is a uh, world in which I was influenced by like all the stuff in Florida, which is like a Republican. I mean, and Florida is like always like really split. It's a swing state, so it's like there's a lot of Democratic tendencies, there's a lot of Republican tendencies. Um, was I influenced by that? Yeah, of course. But I think that I did feel radicalized. Maybe no, but like I felt quite left compared to my counterparts in high school. And then when I got to college, U Chicago like really radicalized me. And then the most I was radicalized to the left was doing comedy. It was like leaving that space and then doing comedy. And then 2020 specifically, and like what that looked like and what that reckoning looked like was a really radicalizing time in my life for me. But Chicago for sure radicalized me more than the South did.
That makes sense. I mean, like, I definitely got radicalized, or I guess more liberal when I came to Michigan, especially Ann Arbor, because it's such a democratic city. Um, but because in Alabama there was like it was so red. Like we had like a mock election in the for 2016 in elementary school, and literally Trump won by a landslide. Like, and I'm
What they're I mean kids aren't really thinking critic. I mean you're a kid, so like
yeah.
but kids don't necessarily have the tools to think critically, and they're kind of like, and that's normal. I don't think people need to. I think a lot of times people like also have that conversation and have like this sense of shame around it. And it's like, well, kids are taught what are I think what they're taught. Like that's normal, and that's like part of why like education, access to education, and these things are quite important. But like it's not a bad thing for like I remember those mock elections we had. I mean, this is to show my age. I remember we had a mock election at my school for Bush versus Gore,
Yeah.
which is like 2004, and or was no Bush Gore was 2000. We did Bush Kerry, which is 2004, but like we had this like big like I remember thinking the same thing. And we did Obama at my in Florida. By the time I got to Florida, I think we did Obama McCain or Obama Romney. I forget which one that we did. But anyway, like it's the same thing where like kids aren't like really thinking about the politics of it. Most kids don't read up on policy or read up on like on
Yeah.
these things, right? Like read up on. Kids just are regurgitate what they hear at home. Like no one's really thinking like. I mean, even like in this election, I think the way Gen Z is like rallying around Kamala is really interesting and cool. I do think that like I don't know if kids are necessarily having the conversation about like her prosecutor past and like what it means to like really be. I mean, I think that that's the other thing. I didn't really know the difference growing up between like liberal and radicalized leftists, and like I would call myself a Democrat back then, but I didn't know that there was a difference between being a Democrat and being a liberal and being like a radicalized leftist, which is what I identify as now, right? So I think like that's another thing. Is just and why should they? Kids are like taking AP classes and busy, like like this isn't a thing that they have to have time.
Yeah.
But yeah, but just to finish the thought, like yeah, it's like I don't know, kids I think are so much more knowledgeable than they are back in the day. But then the reason why I'm not on TikTok and I left TikTok discourse is because like I think that like the conversations felt a little bit sometimes unfruitful and frustrating sometimes, which is fine. Like the conversations can be frustrating and unfruitful, and that's okay. But I think a lot of times, like a lot of kids and a lot of adults. I'm not saying that kids are unique in this, but a lot of people just on that app don't necessarily have the tools to like have the conversation, right?
Yeah.
I think a big why I feel thankful that I went to Chicago is that I was taught not just like what to think, but but how to think and how to have a conversation about these and how like Chicago is all Socratic style learning. So like I learned how to have an argument. I learned how to have the tools to have a proper argument and a proper conversation. And I think a lot of times it's just like people screaming into the void of like and like especially when it comes to like politics, a lot of the times people are like get frustrated that people from the South don't get it or whatever, or like that their friend doesn't get it. But if you're not giving them information or you're not giving them your point of view in a way that's digestible for them, why should they get it? That doesn't make any sense for you to think that they would get it. So yeah, I think that's like a big part of like why I'm not on TikTok, but I think that's a big part of like Gen Z is like in the political landscape of Gen Z. I think that's like a big thing that's gonna either like make or break this next election.
Yeah, definitely. Especially like knowing my generation, they're definitely on social media a lot. So everything that's like on social media is probably going to affect how they view each candidate. So if I definitely think social media has definitely been improving on like being more transparent about the politicians, so that like they can something that like something controversial that someone says is not going to go hidden. Like there's everything we know, like Trump not, technically not being related to Project 2025, but it's probably not true, and like other things, and the memification of Kamala Harris was honestly kind of silly to me, but
I think that they're I mean, I think that like on the gamification of Kamala or anything, I think it's all about just like it's access. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
yeah, it's silly, but it's just like how can we make this accessible and digestible for people who like find politics daunting? But again, but it's just this thing where I'm like I look at like how the way that kids talk about it. It's like why I think the conversations that are being said online a lot of times are quite nuanced, and then some of them are like the most unnuanced thing ever. But then like the part of me and the part of I think adults like get frustrated with that, I have to like take a step back and be like, well, if I was their age, when I was their age, did I have the tools for that? I don't think so. I'm comparing like where people your age are at, like verbiage wise, with where people I'm like people where I'm at, and like that's not a really fair comparison. Um, and it's kind of reductive, I think, in that way. So anyway, that's all to say, like, uh, I, I don't know if like America has the bandwidth or the capabilities to like have this type of conversation like on a grand scale,
yeah,
but I hope they do one day. And I'm not like so American that I'm like the only time I'm ever proud to be an American is during the Olympics, and
that's so
so
true.
like I'm not like as soon as the Olympics are get over, I would be like, okay, well, I want to move back to Korea ASAP, So
Yeah,
I think that like there's yeah, I think that this is going to be a challenge for sure, but I don't know. It has been interesting to see ever since Kamala announced her candidacy. It has been interesting to see like what like the comedy behind it and the memification behind it. And one of my like close friends is like a really famous Kamala impersonator on TikTok and
Yeah.
online, and yeah, and so it's just been so interesting to see through her lens and like see like what it's been like for her ever since Kamala announced. And so in a cool way, like I'm really happy for my friend, and I hope that like this takes her to places like really far. And so it's been cool in that way. But I think all of it again, it's access. Like none all of it is a lot of it feels silly, but it's because it's just to like it's just to remove barriers of entry for people to like understand and digest.
Yeah, I think yeah, definitely the access part is very true. Like, I mean, I'm probably not able to have the actual talk because I like only learned some like all the terms and all that stuff from studying for AP government for high school. Like I that's the only like I never really was interested in politics, and I would just like always hear my parents be like this, and I'm just like I don't really care and I don't really know anything, so whatever they say is probably right. But as I've like definitely learned and been educated more, um I definitely am able to have a more nuanced talk with them, I would say. Yeah.
I think that classes like AP government or like AP comparative government is a really good class for that as well. But like yeah, taking those courses are helpful just to have the verbiage. But a lot of Americans don't ever take those classes and don't
Yeah.
have that verbiage. You know what I mean? Like they wouldn't know what if you told them that we're a democratic republic, they wouldn't know what that means. Like it's like, and that's not like I'm not saying that's the root of the problem or anything like that, but it's just like the fact that people don't know like the way our government structure works or like the way like these are all things that, and these are all things that I think comedy like I mean, not that we have to bring it back to comedy or I don't know, whatever. I mean, you're the interviewer, so you tell me. But I think that I think that's like part of what makes these things digestible and accessible. Is like I think a lot of times people feel really like scared and it's daunting to have these types of conversations. And I don't love having conversations about politics with people that I don't agree with. Obviously, I don't think anyone like loves that, but or maybe people do, and maybe they're freaks. But like I don't love talking to people that I don't agree with about politics per se, but I do think that those conversations are like important and have to happen for us to be able to like move the needle to like a better place.
Yeah. Have you seen Jon Stewart's conversations, like his podcast?
Yeah, my one of my writing partners and friends was a writer on the show that he did with Apple called The Problem with,
Yeah.
or it was called The Problem. But yeah, Jon Stewart's. I mean, Jon Stewart's actually a great example of someone who is able to create and talk about these conversations in a way that is digestible for people who like are across the aisle, if you will.
Yeah. Like I was like I don't usually listen to this stuff, but like I like Jon Stewart, so I was listening to it. I'm like, oh, he's actually like able to have a educated conversation with someone who he doesn't agree with, even though they might be yelling at each other a little bit. At least they're somewhat friends, you know.
Yeah, it's just again, it's all about like I think ultimately like it's every person's threshold is different for what they think is worth it. Jon Stewart is like an older white man, so like
Yeah.
he benefits from all the privileges that the people who don't agree with him benefit from too. So I think, and it's up to him to decide is it worth to. He really has nothing to lose in that way. So I think like that's why he's decided he's going to do it. I think a lot of like older straight white men don't have that same mindset, but they should because they all have nothing to lose really by having these conversations. Um, I have more like I don't look and have the same privileges as Jon Stewart. So like
Yeah.
my threshold for having a conversation is a lot lower. So like I don't but yeah, I think Jon Stewart is a good example of that for sure. But also like again, just like remember Jon Stewart is like an older white man who's been in the industry for a long time, right? That's also the other thing. Like I think a lot of my friends who are like older than me and are white men, straight white men, like have a different mindset on it too, because it's just like they're not like they haven't necessarily been in the industry for that long. So it's just like the conversation is again just a little bit different.
Do you bring your like do you bring politics into your comedy? You would say.
Yes, I don't bring like politics with a capital P per se. Like I'm not like saying like Democrat, Republican. Because I also like I'm not someone that like loves the Democratic Party
Yeah,
either. Like
yeah.
I don't love the two party system. I think I think it has allowed the DNC to get away with some stuff that
Mhm.
they shouldn't. and I think that the Democratic Party like needs to like get its act together as well, because there's a lot of issues with it. Even though of course like politically I align more with the Democratic Party than I will ever with the Republican Party, but um I think the two party system is wild, and I wanted Bernie for the longest. Anyway, that's to say I'm not like I don't bring like that kind of politics. I'm not going on stage and being like go Bernie or go whatever. Like I don't do that per se, but I do bring up politics in the sense that like I talk almost all of my content I bring to the stage has something to do with either like being queer or being Asian. Like all of it always does. Like there's very few things that I create that don't have a lens that is like specifically through Asian and queer like a point of view. And I do it in a way that I think is quite funny, and in a way that's nuanced and new so that people feel challenged. But I want like I think for me like I don't necessarily need my art to be challenging, but I think because what I like to do in comedy is to talk about my identity, it ends up being challenging.
Yeah. I know, I noticed I was like watching some of your material, and I noticed you definitely do include a lot of it, like such as like J.K. Rowling, you reading J.K. Rowling's first openly gay character and all that stuff. And I definitely, as an Asian, I definitely relate to it. Like even though I'm not gay, but a lot of my friends think I am, and they're we just waiting for me to come out of the closet for some reason. Um, it's like I definitely relate to a lot of your content. I would say, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like I mean I don't know. I think it's like all like whatever people want. I mean, I perform at UCB, which is like a comedy institution here, and I think a lot of the people that I'm on my character team with like create characters that like don't have that same like rooting and identity, which is fine. Like it's not just because you're a person of color doesn't mean that you have to talk about being a person of color all the time. Some people hate talking about being a person of color, and that's like also totally legitimate and okay. I just am someone that like that it's such a big part of my life that it doesn't make sense for me personally to not let that be reflected in my art. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you when you create this content, do you think of like, oh, this might be a little bit too offensive to somebody, or like, or is like, oh, I might get canceled for saying this? Like, do you ever have that thought?
No, but I don't think I create content that would ever push the needle. I don't. I think my content is like. I think I'm not really creating content per se. Like when I'm in the way that like I'm doing. Like I'm not doing. I'm not a front facing camera or Instagram Reels person. Like
Yeah.
I don't do TikTok. Like I don't create in that way. But when I think about like my art, I know where my art stands politically, so I'm not worried. I'm not saying anything that's offensive that I don't have the right to say. I think when people are afraid of getting canceled or afraid of it, it's because they're saying something that maybe they shouldn't say, right? And they're worried. They're wondering where is the needle for what I'm allowed to say. I never say anything that I don't have full right to say, right? Like if I'm saying anything that like is offensive, quote quote, for example, like it's because I'm allowed to say it, right? Like I can say certain slurs, I can say like certain
Yeah.
things about my identity, I can say certain things about my race or whatever. So I'm gonna say it. When people are get cancer, or whatever, it's because they're saying things that they don't have the right to say per se. So like I'm never going to comment on like a racial group that I align with. I'm never gonna comment on like uh I'm trying to think of other examples. I'm not gonna call. None of my content has to do with my gender. For example, I'm like a cis man, and I like am staunchly a cis man. So I'm not gonna make like jokes about the trans experience. I'm not gonna make content. So for that reason, I'm never worried about whether or not like my content's gonna get me like canceled or anything like that, or whether or not it's okay to say. But I do think there are a lot of comedians who do, and I think a lot of comedians feel like they have to because they're like right now the zeitgeist is like so like talk about your identity and talk about these things, and so a lot of like white men in particular are like, well, there's nothing really to say about being a
Yeah.
white
Yeah.
man, so I feel like I have to talk about like this other person's experience, which is like again, if you do it in an intelligent way, sure, and if you do it in a way that's punching up and not punching down, that's okay. I think like there's a lot of really great stand-ups that do that really really well. I think like Jean-Marco Soresi is like a great example of a stand-up that like is a straight white man and like punches up all the time. He like isn't someone that really punches down. But I think once comics start punching down, that's when it's like you're talking about someone identity that you don't align with and you're punching down. That's when people get mad and upset, you know.
Yeah. I definitely. I mean, it's like I mean, I personally don't find like really what people find offensive. It like I have like a lower. I've I don't know how to say this, but I just like people. It's like some people find like some certain content offensive, and I'm just like I don't like I could see why you think of it like as offensive, but I don't see it as offensive. Like I think of it as a joke, and it's like comedy. So it's like I'm like it doesn't. It's all just a joke to me. So I don't really see it.
I think when people are upset by jokes, whatever it is, I have to ask, like, is it because they're punching up or punching down? And if if people are upset by someone getting someone punching down, that is legitimate, and you should be upset and you should call them out because they have privilege over this group. They shouldn't be punching down on them. People have disliked my content before, of course, and been like upset by it. That like bit you saw with the J.K. Rowling bit, that first part isn't my favorite part of the joke. The video cuts off at it, but I read a part that's like the first openly Asian character that she ever wrote, and I have this bit about like what it means to be openly Asian, and it's like this other bit, and like that is something that like I love doing that bit, but that's a bit that sometimes makes like white people uncomfortable, and like white people don't love it, but I'm punching up at whiteness, so I'm not like so if people don't like the content or feel offended by it because I'm punching up, it's not because it's problematic, it's because they're uncomfortable with like their privilege, and so that's like a different conversation, right? So like I don't care if someone like doesn't like a joke because yeah, because it's punching down. I usually agree. I'm like, yeah, that person should be making that joke. I don't like that joke. I think that that's like a weird point, like take to have. But if someone's punching up at it and someone doesn't like it, then you have to ask, like, you have to ask them, like, is it because you're uncomfortable that someone's like calling out this like system that you benefit from? If that's the case, I think it's a very human reaction to be uncomfortable and dislike that. But like, you have to ask yourself, like, why am I uncomfortable by this, and like, what am I gonna do about it?
Yeah, I never really actually thought about it that deeply, but that's actually a really good way to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, again, and it's just like, and all of it is subjective too. So like, I think that's the other thing. It's not objective per se, but yeah, I mean, if people are offended by punching up, then that just usually means that they're like uncomfortable, and that's a good discomfort is good. Discomfort is how you grow. It's the same thing in the gym. I think a lot of these people like forget that. Like a lot of these guys, for example, are like gym rats, and they're like, oh, I hate this joke. It's uncomfortable. I'm like, you are uncomfortable every day at the gym. Like
Yeah,
that's how you gain muscle. That's how you like get toned. Like discomfort is good. Discomfort is growth in every like in physical, emotional, mental sense. Discomfort is going to if you allow it to be growth, it's either growth or you die. Like those are your two options.
yeah, exactly. Like you always, I always hated getting out of my comfort zone, but like I've slowly as like as I've grown, not that I've really grown, but as I've like aged, I definitely feel like it's more important to try new things, even if I feel very discomforting doing those things, but it's just great to experience everything, you know?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. So I also saw that you did a story slam a few years back called like Misfits
Yeah.
and Shamu. Yeah. And you were saying how you were still on this journey of like self love and like accepting yourself in a way. How is it going so far after a few years later?
So funny. I forgot I did that. It's so interesting. It's been going. It's had its ups and downs for sure. I think that like how old was it when I did that? I think I must have been 23, 22. It was like 6 years ago. I think
Yeah.
6 years ago. Um, it's been a journey. I think that if you had asked me this like a year and a half ago, I would have been like, it's going great. And then the last year, I think I've had a big alignment on race and my relationship with whiteness and like who I choose to surround myself with and things like that. And that's been a really lovely conversation to have with myself, but a hard one to have with myself. And um, I think it's been going well, I guess is the short answer, but it's not like it's not without its ups and downs for sure.
Yeah. Uh, do you think is it kind of like a spiral in a way, or it's like it goes up for like two steps and then goes back down one step, and it goes up two steps and goes down one step.
It doesn't feel like that patterned. I think like for a long time it felt like it was going up, 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 and then like last year it felt like it was going like back, like almost like past where it was, and like
Yeah.
like I think like, but I think like again as you get older, like there's everything about you changes, right? Like the cells in your body are completely different than the ones that were in your body like a long time ago. Like so like you're just a completely fundamentally different person. I remember even thinking in college like after my first year of college, I was like, oh my god, I'm such a different person. And then I think about like where I was that year, and then where I was at the end of my fourth year, and I was like, oh my, like night and day between senior year and freshman year, Steve, and like even now I'm such a different person than I was then. And so there's just so many things that like are constantly changing in a person's life and in a person's um in the way we like perceive and view the world, I guess. So uh yeah, I think that I mean growth is non-linear, famously, and so I
Yeah.
think like yeah, there's been moments where it's felt big. I think about like the three like worst years of my life, and last year it like ranks among them for sure. And I think that like yes, and so in that way, that's all to say like yeah, it's there's been a lot of growth, there's been a lot of progress. I think there's been a lot of the biggest change has happened existed in like how I'm viewing my growth though. I think a lot of times like especially like as Asian people, I think we like beat ourselves up if we're not like getting to the thing the fastest, or we're not like like it's like
Yeah.
I used to feel a lot of frustration when I would like be sad. I'd be like, why are you sad? Like grow up. It would like worsen the problem. And so now I'm like I have like I'm gentler with myself, for example. I'm like there those are like elements of things that are different for sure.
Yeah. This is just a random question, but I saw on your resume that you were actually like fluent in Mandarin. And
Yeah.
as a person who is Chinese and also fluent in Mandarin, how did you feel when you were learning it? Like did you learn in America or Korea?
Like I started learning Korea, and I don't know if that resume is old. I've knocked it down to conversational recently because I just went to China, and I was like, I mean, I'm really my when I speak Chinese, it's so shy, and like I kind of like whisper it, and they're like, what? They're like, what are you saying? Like, speak up. I mean, China's just a loud country, I would
Yeah.
say, but I went to China, and like I was like, okay, I can't. I'm getting by, but I'm not like, and I can read it better than I can. I can read and write better than I can speak it because in Korea I'll have to learn how to
Yeah,
read and
yeah.
write it. We just speak it. We just pronounce things differently because we're doing it in Korean. But when I was learning it, like I don't know. I mean, I I growing up actually I wanted to be Chinese really badly because like Korea wasn't like people didn't know what Korea was like in Florida in particular. So
Yeah.
like I was like I want to be so bad because everyone knows China. Like China has its own pavilion at Epcot. Like China, it's so cool to be Chinese. And it's been interesting because in the last like 5 years, Korea's like been the like not the cool one, but like Korea. I mean, but yeah, in the short sense, really cool. Like it's been cool to be Korean and like
Yeah.
with K-pop and K-beauty and K like Korean TV shows and K-dramas. Like Korea's kind of like this huge, like the cultural footprint of Korea in like the world right now is quite big. And so it's been cool to see this alignment change with like the way people like view Koreanness and talk about it. But I do think that there's so much of the world that is still really problematic about like Asian people in particular, but especially about China. And so I think there's this like weird like juxtaposition I have in my head about that of like I think Korea is so great and I'm so proud to be Korean, but like I don't want that to be like at the cost of like people disparaging like other Asian populations and other Asian communities. But I will say culturally, like China was very challenging for me
Yeah.
recently when I went. It's like it was not very easy for me as a Korean person, but I had fun. The food was great, but it did make me like understand. I think like the language a little bit better in its like origins because I remember like growing up, I learned Chinese. I liked learning Chinese, and I think Chinese is like a great like is a cool language. It's hard, which I like that about a language.
Yeah.
Like I think like I like writing it. I think it like I like that like if you get it, you get it. If you don't get stroke order, you don't get stroke order. Like that was like I remember liking that, but I don't. I remember thinking as a kid like that it was like our Chinese teachers would like yell at us a lot, and I remember thinking like why is everyone so loud? And I went to China recently, and I was like, oh, I think it's just like I think everyone here is just kind of loud. I think like you have to be
Yeah.
loud to like get through here. I think that's like totally normal. Versus like Japan, where everything's like so like it like shame is like a really big part of Japanese culture. Everything's like really small and contained, and like you know like kind of keeps themselves in China. Like after the Cultural Revolution, is quite different. So that was a cool like juxtaposition of and seeing like the language that I had spent my whole life learning basically like in practice was quite cool as well. But yeah, I was there for work and I was with people that were really great and I really liked the people that I went with and they really showed me China and they're so fun and they all live in China and they're fully Chinese. Um But yeah, it was just like really, it was just so cool to see a country as well that's like so anti-American. Like that's the other thing. I'd never been to a country where I was like, I like forgot that Google doesn't work there, so I was like, why is my Gmail not working?
Yeah.
Why is my YouTube not working? Like using Alipay for everything, using like using Didi to get around. Like
Yeah.
there's so many things. I was like, oh, I forgot that like I'm in a different country, but I'm so used to it in Korea. Everything just translates directly over. So
Yeah.
like they have Uber as well. The Uber app just changes colors, but they have Uber. They have like Instagram works there. Like Gmail works there. Like all of it's so American. So I forgot that like I was so used to this comfort of a very Americanized
Yeah.
Asian country, which is easy as an American living in America visiting Asia, but is not always. I think like how China has preserved its culture is actually and built its own culture is like very cool.
Yeah, definitely China. When I went to China a few years ago, even as a Chinese person who knows like the normal accents and dialects and things, when I talked to like my grandparents who had like a quite deep like accent or dialect, I had no idea what they were saying. I was like I can barely understand. I'm like, Mom, can you like translate this into normal Chinese? Because I do not know this. Like, it was so weird, and it was definitely it's actually really funny because in the past few years I've been mistaken as being Korean more than Chinese in America.
Hmm.
Like everyone, like
Yeah,
yeah, like all my friends who are like some of my friends who are Korean, people are like, "Oh, are you Chinese?" I'm like, "No, no, I'm the Chinese person. She's Korean." So it's just like it's like super weird to me.
yeah, I mean, I think that growing up, people thought I was Chinese, and I think it's just like white people don't know the nuances between because I think Chinese people and Korean people and Japanese people all look different. I think there's like a lot of
Yeah,
different characteristics in them, and I think they just don't know the difference. So they just like think like whatever is like the biggest country in their mind, they just think that an Asian person is from that country, you know. So they're just like because Korea is like so in the zeitgeist right now, people are like, oh, all Asian people must be Korean, when in reality, like that's not truth. So um, yeah, it's just like unnuanced takes on race.
yeah. And I don't know. It's very like I definitely it should be probably offensive to me, but it's very funny for me to see like white people reacting to like Asian things because like they like there was like even in Ann Arbor, I've like have like multiple like experiences where people are like, "Oh, are you visiting or permanent here?" Or it's just like, "Oh, South Korea?" Like they were like it was like very interesting watching them wrap this seemingly new concept around their mind, you know?
Yeah, I don't have it in me to handle that anymore, and I'm quite rude to people who think that. And yeah, I don't. I there was a period of my life where I think I was nicer about it, but I'm quite rude to people who ask me those questions
Yeah,
as well, and I have ways to make it frustrating for them. I'm kind of an asshole about it, and I am
as you
like
should.
quite I make it challenging for them to sit. And a lot of people get. I was with my friends recently. One of my friends who hates conflict, and I made like the stranger who asked me this question like quite uncomfortable
Yeah.
by asking like basically asking the same question back. Um, and my friend was like getting like upset next to me and being like just let it go. And it's like I mean I'm fine. I'm not angry at this. I mean like I'm annoyed, but I'm like I'm not. I'm gonna sleep easy tonight. I'm
Yeah.
gonna make it hell for this person though. So like let's. And they're never gonna make this mistake again. I'm making it easier for the next person that they interact with that's Asian. So
You're
like
just helping
they'll never make this
society.
mistake again. Okay, yeah. So it's like I think that's a really common like thing. But I do have to remember though. Sometimes especially when I'm being an asshole, I have to remember that like I have access to a lot of educational privilege. So I think like that's something that I've had to dismantle and realize as well. But yeah,
You just learn to be an asshole at the right times.
yeah, exactly.
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 All right. I know we've kind of strayed away from comedy, which is honestly fine. I don't really care that much. But here's just the last question. Um, what is advice you would give to somebody who wants to do acting or comedy or wants to start on it at least?
I would say this is. I'm sure someone else has given this advice before, but the first thing I'll say is that if you can do anything else, do it something else. Like if there's anything else you wake up in the morning wanting to do that, because this industry is like not for the faint of heart, emotionally speaking. The second thing I'll say is that like do the work and know yourself first, because the stronger the foundation is and what your point of view is and who you are, the easier the material will come out. I think a lot of times people don't really know who they are and think that comedy will help them get there, and that may be true, but I personally have found that the more work that I do on myself, the better my content is. So like know who you are, be proud of who you are, as long as who you are is not problematic or weird. But like know who you are, know what you are, and allow that to be the like main driver in like what you do.
Yeah. So if you want to do anything else, do that first before you do comedy.
If you wake up every morning and think like I don't know if I want to do comedy, I want to do like like archaeology, do archaeology. It's gonna be easier. It's like you're gonna get more work. Like just do the other thing. But if you do comedy because it's like something that you love doing, just yeah, make sure that it's know who you are, and that'll make your life so much easier.
All right, sounds good. Thank you for having a conversation with me.
Of course. I hope this was helpful.
Yeah, it definitely was. It was definitely one of the more intellectual conversations I've been having.
Yeah, I think I tend to gravitate that way just because of Chicago, but I really love I think comedy can be theoretical. I just don't think most people engage with it in the way that I like to.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like most people think it probably ruins the fun of it, but like, it's fun. It's
Yeah.
fun looking at it.
I think it makes it more fun for me. But yeah, I think a lot of people just don't like that. But I think again it's like a discomfort thing. I think most people just like feel like they can't have an intellectual conversation about it. So it's like they don't. When people say like it's gonna take like the fun out of it, I'm like you haven't ever experienced this, so how would you know? I mean,
Yeah,
it's like I always ask people, especially like when I'm coaching people or if I'm directing people and people don't want to do something, I'm like, have you done it before? And they're like, no. And I'm like, then why do you already have a preconceived notion of it? You don't know.
exactly.
But that's again, that's like most people not wanting to be uncomfortable. That's like why people. It's why when people like get filmed when they're getting like canceled, for example, like people like freak out and have like meltdowns. I mean, like, yeah, I think it's really scary to have a camera pointed at you, knowing that like the world is gonna see it, of
Yeah,
course. But it's like it's a new experience for them to like be called out in this way, and so they like react in like the most extreme way because they've never experienced the the what the experience is getting called out for something, a problematic behavior that you've been doing for a while, you know.
yeah.
So it's like not that's an extreme version of it, but yeah, it's all about just like life is a bunch of experiences, you know. Just it's about figuring out what you like and what you don't like.
Facts, facts.
Yeah,
All right.
well, it's wonderful to meet you. I hope there's anything else that I can ever do, but
Yeah, I would
uh,
love to meet you in person. Like, maybe if I visit LA, I'll definitely try to meet you.
no, yeah, let me know.
All right,
I'll
sounds
be
good.
here.
All right.
Okay, I'd like to hear.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I can't believe you made it after almost 70 to 80 minutes. It definitely was a long conversation, but I hope you enjoyed it. I tried to not cut out as many things as possible. You might have heard a few yawns by Steve, but that's okay because in the end, we were having a very entertaining conversation, I believe. I did, though, pick up on a lot of my bad habits while interviewing people, and I will try my best to interview better. But that's for me, and I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good night, good evening, good morning, wherever you are, whatever time, and let me know who you want me to interview, or just let me know your feedback because I really want to know what people think about it. Thank you for listening.